The rain drummed a relentless, hollow rhythm against the brick exterior of the Oak Creek police station. Sarah pushed the heavy glass door outward, the metal frame groaning under her grip. She stepped into the downpour, her boots clicking sharply against the slick, uneven pavement. A biting autumn wind whipped through the alleyway, stinging her face and forcing her to pull her cap lower. Above, a single street lamp flickered, casting a long, distorted shadow that stretched toward the dark parking lot. She stopped for a moment, her breath hitching in the freezing air, and tightened her hands into fists at her sides. The water cascaded from the gutters, splashing onto the concrete with a sound like shattering glass. She did not look back. The night felt infinite, cold, and entirely indifferent to the storm she was carrying inside. The memory of the market burned brighter than the streetlights. She had stepped between them, the vendor, trembling, and the three men who claimed the town as their own. They were the sons of the wealthiest developer in the county, men who had never heard the word no. She had held her ground, her hand resting on her holster, demanding they back away. They had laughed, their voices thick with entitlement, before shoving the vendor into a stack of crates. She had pushed back. The force of her shove had sent the lead agitator stumbling into the mud. That was the moment, the shift in the air, the realization that she had crossed a line they considered sacred. Now, that memory was a formal document sitting on the captain's desk, a complaint for excessive force, a paper trail designed to end her career. The ink on that document was a death warrant for her badge, a symbol she had spent years earning. She reached her car, her fingers fumbling with the keys as the rain intensified. The metal of the key fob felt freezing against her palm. She looked back at the station, the windows glowing with a sterile, unforgiving light. The complaint was not just a grievance. It was a wall being built around her, brick by brick, intended to isolate her from the force she had sworn to serve. She stood by the driver's side door, the metal cold and slick under her palm. The street lamp overhead buzzed, a dying electrical sound that punctuated the rhythmic drumming of the rain. She did not unlock the car immediately. Instead, she turned to face the empty street, watching the water pool in the cracks of the asphalt. There were no witnesses here, no captains to judge her, no developers to threaten her, and no vendors to protect. Just the biting autumn wind and the hollow silence of the town. She felt the badge in her pocket, a heavy, unyielding piece of metal. She looked down the long, dark stretch of the road, the flickering shadows dancing against the brick walls. Her breath hitched, turning into a thin white mist. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass of the window, closing her eyes to shut out the oppressive darkness. She opened her eyes, looked into the void of the empty street, and whispered, "I just did what was right." The rain stopped. The world tilted, the grey concrete of the police station dissolving into the amber hues of Riverside Park. It was 1 week ago. The air had been sharp, smelling of damp earth and the sweet, heavy scent of decaying leaves. Sarah walked the path, her pace steady, the double shift behind her finally fading into the quiet of the evening. The park was nearly empty, save for the long, stretching shadows cast by the setting sun. She liked the silence here. It was a clean, honest kind of quiet. Then, the rhythm of her walk broke. A sharp, jagged sound cut through the stillness, the sound of laughter. It was not the light, easy laughter of friends, but something pointed and cruel. She slowed her steps, her gaze shifting toward a bench. A group of teenagers stood in a tight circle, their movements erratic and aggressive. They shoved something or someone aside. A man, thin and frail, stumbled against the wood of the bench, his body folding under the force of the impact. He did not fight back. The laughter faded into the distance, leaving only the sound of the wind rattling the dry leaves. Sarah did not look after the teenagers. Her focus locked onto the man. He was still, his frame barely visible against the dark wood of the bench. She took a step, then another, the grass crunching under her feet. The ground here was soft, saturated by the recent damp. But she did not break her stride. She reached the bench and dropped to her knees. The mud was cold, instantly soaking through the fabric of her trousers. But she did not shift her weight or pull back. She leaned in, her hands steady as she reached out to touch his shoulder. The man remained slumped, his breathing shallow and ragged. She could see the way his fingers curled against the wood, stiff and unresponsive. She ignored the chill creeping up her legs and the dampness pressing against her skin. Her attention was entirely on the man, on the way his head hung low, and on the silence that seemed to weigh him down. She shifted closer, her knees sinking deeper into the wet earth, and waited for him to register her presence. The world beyond the park bench ceased to exist. Sarah took his hand. It was freezing, his skin like dry, brittle parchment against her palm. She squeezed gently, trying to anchor him. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked. Her voice was low, steady, cutting through the rustle of the wind. The man looked up, his eyes clouded, heavy with fatigue and confusion. He blinked, struggling to focus on her face. "I lost my wallet," he murmured, his voice trembling like a leaf. "I just need to find my way home." Sarah felt the weight of her own pocket. Inside was a $20 bill, the exact amount she had set aside for her brother's medical copay. It was the only money she had until the next paycheck. She did not hesitate. She pulled the bill from her pocket, the paper crisp and sharp against her skin. She pressed it firmly into his shaking palm, closing his fingers around it. "Take a cab," she said, her tone leaving no room for refusal. "And get a hot meal at the diner on Main, please." The man looked at the money, then back at her. He did not speak. His grip tightened on her hand. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a low, persistent buzz that vibrated against the back of Sarah's neck. She sat in the corner booth, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug. The coffee had long since turned cold, a thin, translucent film forming on the surface. It was a stagnant mirror of her current reality. Outside the shop window, the street was blurred by the relentless drizzle, but inside, the air felt heavy and motionless. She looked at her hands, still steady, though the weight of the formal complaint pressed down on her thoughts. Every time the door chime rang, she flinched, expecting a superior or a process server to walk in. The investigation had moved from a whisper to a roar, and the silence in the booth was no longer a comfort. It was a vacuum. She took a breath, the air tasting of burned beans and stale paper, and braced herself for the conversation that would define her future. Daniel pulled the chair out, the legs scraping harshly against the linoleum. He sat down, his gaze locking onto hers immediately. Sarah did not look up. She stared at the dark, still surface of her coffee, the reflection of the overhead lights distorted in the liquid. She opened her mouth, but the words felt heavy, catching in her throat. She forced them out, her voice barely audible over the hum. "The complaint is moving forward," she said, her fingers tightening around the mug until her knuckles turned white. "I might lose my job. I might end up with a record." She looked at him then, searching his face for a reaction, but found only a steady, calm focus. She felt a sharp, sudden urge to push him away, to build a wall between his life and the wreckage of her own. She pulled her hands back from the table, tucking them into her lap. "I cannot let you be tied to this, Daniel. If I go down, there is no reason for you to be caught in the fallout." She leaned back, the vinyl of the booth creaking, and waited. Daniel did not hesitate. He leaned forward, the table shifting slightly under his weight, and reached across the cold surface. He covered her hand with his palm firm and warm against her skin. Sarah tried to pull back, her fingers twitching, but he held on, his grip steady and unyielding. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting sharp shadows across the table. "I am not going anywhere," he said, his voice low and clear. He did not look away, his eyes locked onto hers, with a focus that defied the uncertainty of her situation. Sarah felt the tension in her shoulders loosen, just a fraction. He squeezed her hand, a grounding pressure that cut through the haze of her fear. "We face this together," he added, the words landing with a weight that felt like a promise. For a moment, the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside faded. She stopped fighting his grip, letting her hand rest beneath his. She looked at him, and the path ahead seemed possible to navigate. The steakhouse stood at the corner of the block, a fortress of polished wood and low amber light. Sarah stopped on the sidewalk, the biting wind tugging at her hair. She looked at the heavy brass handle of the door, her hand hovering in the air before she finally gripped it. The metal was cold, biting into her palm. She took a breath, trying to steady the rhythm of her lungs. Inside, the muffled sound of clinking silverware drifted through. She felt the weight of the pending complaint like a physical burden, a secret anchor dragging behind her with every step. She pushed the door open. A wave of warmth and the scent of searing meat hit her immediately, a stark contrast to the damp chill. She stepped into the foyer, the floor beneath her boots smooth and unforgiving. Her gaze remained fixed on the floor. She took one more step, then another, moving toward the back of the room where the private dining area waited. The hallway leading to the private room felt longer than it should have, the carpet beneath her boots thick and sound-dampening. Sarah kept her head down, her eyes tracing the intricate patterns of the wallpaper to avoid the gaze of passing servers. Every step felt like a march toward a verdict she was not ready to hear. She reached the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor. It was closed, a solid barrier between her and the man who held the power to dismantle her life. She stopped, her hand hovering inches from the brass handle. From behind the wood, the low murmur of conversation drifted out, indistinguishable but heavy with authority. She took a breath, the air in the hallway smelling of cedar and expensive wax. Her fingers curled around the cold metal. She pushed. The door swung inward with a smooth, silent motion. Inside, the room was bathed in the soft glow of a low-hanging chandelier. As she crossed the threshold, the sharp, sudden scrape of a chair cut through the quiet. The air in the room felt thin, charged with a static pressure that made the fine hairs on her arms stand up. Sarah remained motionless, her gaze locked onto the polished hardwood floorboards. She counted the seconds, the rhythmic ticking of a wall clock. Then the silence broke. A voice, deep and resonant, boomed from the head of the table. It was a sound of absolute authority, cutting through the heavy atmosphere like a blade. The suddenness of it made her breath hitch in her throat. She felt her pulse hammering against her ribs, a frantic, uneven rhythm that betrayed her composure. This was the moment. She forced her chin upward, her muscles tight with the effort of defiance. Her eyes flicked from the floor to the table. As her vision cleared, she locked eyes with the man standing at the head of the table. Her heart skipped a beat, then surged. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in as she prepared to face the man who held her future happiness in his hands. The man at the head of the table stood perfectly still, his weight balanced on both feet. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs in a sharp, involuntary gasp. It was him, the same face she had seen slumped against the park bench, the same eyes that had looked up at her with such profound fatigue. The environment shifted instantly. The polished wood of the table, the soft glow of the chandelier, the heavy silence of the room. It all blurred into a single, overwhelming sensation of disbelief. She blinked, trying to reconcile the man standing before her with the figure she had knelt beside on the wet grass. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, went slack. A tremor started in her knees, a physical reaction to the sheer impossibility of the moment. She searched his face for a sign of recognition, but he remained focused, his presence commanding the entire space. The shock hit her like a physical wave, pushing the breath from her chest. The stern lines of his face began to soften, the rigid set of his jaw breaking apart. A smile, wide and disbelieving, spread across his features, transforming the atmosphere of the room in a single heartbeat. Sarah watched, her own hands trembling as he pushed away from the head of the table. He did not look at his son or the other guests. He moved directly toward her, his stride purposeful and quick. The room seemed to hold its breath. The clatter of silverware on porcelain ceased. Every person at the table turned, their eyes wide, watching the interaction unfold in total silence. He reached her and stopped, his presence filling the space between them. Without a word, he reached out and took both of her hands in his. His grip was firm, warm, and grounding. He held her hands tightly, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her knees weak. The judge turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of the guests. He did not let go of Sarah's hands. "Daniel," he said, his voice resonant and thick with emotion, "this is the young woman who saved me last week." The words hung in the air, sharp and clear. He gestured towards Sarah, his grip tightening as he spoke. "She found me when I had nothing, when I was lost and exhausted. She gave me her last $20 and walked away before I could even thank her." The silence in the room shattered. A sharp intake of breath echoed from the table. The guests shifted, their expressions transforming from confusion to visible shock. The power dynamic of the evening inverted in an instant. The judge turned back to his son, his eyes bright and focused. "How did you find someone like her?" he asked, his tone demanding an answer that the room was suddenly desperate to hear. Sarah felt the weight of the room's attention shift entirely onto her. The guests sat frozen, their forks resting untouched on their plates. The investigation did not merely end, it collapsed under the weight of the truth. Within 24 hours, the judge had moved with the precision of a man reclaiming his own legacy. He sat in his study, the phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and unrelenting as he spoke to the precinct leadership. He demanded files, names, and accountability. He did not ask for favors. He laid out the evidence of the farmers' market incident with clinical, devastating clarity. By the following morning, the precinct was in chaos. The officers who had ignored the facts found their desks cleared and their badges surrendered. They walked out of the station under the cold, steady gaze of their peers, their careers dismantled by a single afternoon of intervention. Meanwhile, the developers' sons were summoned to the station, their arrogance replaced by the sharp, sudden reality of handcuffs. The legal machinery, once stalled by influence, now turned with grinding efficiency against them. Sarah watched the news reports from the quiet of her kitchen, the screen flickering with the faces of those who had once held power over her future. The storm had passed, leaving the town's foundation exposed and scrubbed clean. The silence that followed was not one of tension, but of a long overdue equilibrium, finally restored. The morning sun cut through the office window, casting a warm, steady glow across the surface of the desk. Sarah sat in the silence, the air still and clear. She set her coffee mug down, the ceramic clicking softly against the wood. Beside it, a small framed wedding photo caught the light, the image sharp and vibrant against the morning haze. She leaned back, her chair creaking slightly as she stretched. The frantic pace of the previous weeks had vanished, replaced by the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock. She looked out the window, past the glass, toward the park across the street. The trees were shedding their leaves, a slow, golden descent toward the ground. She watched the movement, her eyes tracking the drift of the foliage. Everything felt anchored, solid, and finally right. The desk was clear of files, the drawers were organized, and the weight that had pressed against her chest for months had dissolved. She took a slow breath, feeling the warmth of the sun on her hands. Her gaze drifted further, settling on the park bench across the street. It was empty now, the wood darkened by the morning dew. She remembered the texture of the grass beneath her knees, the cold air biting at her skin, and the weight of the $20 bill in her hand. That moment had felt small, a fleeting choice made in the dark, yet it had pulled the threads of her entire life into a new pattern. She watched a single leaf detach from a branch and spiral down to land on the bench. It was a simple, physical connection. The man she had helped was not a stranger, but the catalyst for a shift that had saved her career and brought her into a new family. She traced the edge of the desk with her thumb, feeling the grain of the wood. Kindness was not a transaction with a set beginning or end. It was a ripple, moving outward across the water, hitting the shore and returning with a force that reshaped the landscape. She looked at the bench one last time, seeing it not as a place of past struggle, but as the point where the wave had started. The park remained still. The city continued its hum, and the cycle was complete. She turned away from the window, the light following her across the floor. The office felt different now, not just a place of work, but a space of stability. She thought of the storms that had nearly dismantled her life, the pressure of the complaint, and the uncertainty of her future. Those moments were no longer threats. They were lessons in the weight of a single honest act. She reached out and closed the folder on her desk, the sound final and clean. The strength she had found was not something she had been given, but something she had built through the simple act of reaching out to another. She stood up, her movements deliberate and steady. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the glass, but she did not flinch. She knew the nature of the world, the way the cold could bite and the shadows could lengthen. Yet she also knew the power of the ripple. She walked toward the door, her pace even, ready for whatever the next day would bring. The office remained, bathed in the morning light.